Wow. I'm ready.
Okay, go for it. The floor's yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Hang on, share screen. Okay, so just a quick check. Is there anyone who can't see my first slide? That's all sounding good.
I can see, yeah, you're good.
Brilliant. Okay, so as I said in the little abstract Laura kindly sent round, I'm going to talk about a long-standing research creative project of mine, which is really looking at the real-time search of large data sets and large data sets associated with social media use. And what I'm trying to do in these projects is to visualize aspects of collective thought, things which are hidden to us normally, but actually we can make visible through the mining of this data set. Now, of course, that's quite an ambitious aim, really. So I'm going to spend a bit of time before I actually start showing you the work, actually talking about, first of all, why I think this is worth doing, and then also a little bit about my methodology, because obviously the devil's in the detail here. Really, how you do it, I think, raises some interesting questions about what I'm doing and does it really meet the objectives I'm setting out for myself. So the first thing I suppose I want to say is, is to think about thinking and think about thoughts. And thoughts are still just private things. They're responses inside someone's head to a public shared physical world and to other people in that world. But they're representations to ourselves of our place in the world and our context in the world. And the interesting thing about mind is that there is a really long-standing public fascination with mind reading. And you can see that, looking at, history of mind reading and sort of circus acts and all that sort of thing. But also, of course, if you look at modern neuroscience, there's a fantastically well-resourced effort going into trying to actually, use neuroscience and various sorts of scanning to try and make someone's internal state visible to other people. So, are they telling lies? What are they thinking of? All that sort of thing. And so, from this, my inference is that actually, culturally, this is very important. It's a significant thing to know what people are thinking. And some anthropologists have suggested that actually that sort of empathy, that being able to intuit what people are thinking about, is an essentially human trait. And that actually, one of the reasons our brains are so large is that we actually spend a lot of the processing power of our brains trying to think what other people are thinking about and trying to sort of empathize and intuit what they're thinking about things. So my research project, I like to think, does draw on a couple of sort of mainstream cultural preoccupations, while at the same time actually bringing some tools, some modern technological tools to bear on that process. Now, I'm absolutely not trying to intuit anyone's individual thoughts. This is about a collective thought. It's about us as or rather, that subset of us who are digitally connected. And of course, I do realize that it excludes a lot of people and that it privileges a lot of people, some of whom maybe don't even deserve to be privileged. That's a separate issue. But of those digitally connected people, I'm trying to get to some sort of understanding and some sort of analysis and some sort of public showing and revealing of what we are thinking as a group. So in one of the projects I'm going to talk about today, I actually let collective thought unravel in front of you. And so it produces streams of consciousness, really. And it does that, well, I'll demonstrate. I'm hopefully going to do 2 live demos today. They are live, they are dynamic, and so we are subject not only to the vagaries of sharing, but also the vagaries of the internet and, what people are thinking about. So I can't control that. But on one of these, I'm going to try and demonstrate a piece that actually creates summed streams of consciousness. And the idea is that these are then projected onto the physical world to enrich it, so that while you're actually having an experience of the physical world, you are at the same time, the technology is used to enrich it. It's an extension of reality in that sense, to actually project extra information onto the physical world. And in the second piece I'll be showing you, I'm actually looking at the emergence of collective thought and sort of dissecting the initial starting points and allowing you, or the user, I hope, to actually experience something of the emergence of a collective view on things. So that's what I'm trying to do. I want to start off though by thinking about the methodology, really, because I've made these bold claims about thought and that sort of thing, but I'm not looking at people. I'm looking at a particular system, a couple of particular systems, and of course there's the question, it has to be asked, well, how valid is that really? Is that really a proper way to approach this aim? And I suppose here, right from the beginning of archaeology and things like that, there's a recognition that there is a relationship between, on the one hand, the forms and productions of use and tools, and the materiality of the human body. And that this operates in both ways. So actually when people develop a tool, yes, they're able to change the world and change their context, but also the having of that tool changes the people who invented it. And of course, originally this feedback loop was very, very slow. It operated through DNA. So you can look at, the development of farming and the DNA that allowed people to actually digest milk in their adult stage. This gave them an advantage, even in evolutionary terms, over a long, long, long period. And so we had the alteration there. There's a suggestion that actually in recent times, and I've put a quote by J. David Boulder here, that actually technology has speeded up that process. I mean, there's a separate discussion that actually evolution itself has been sped up through technology. But, there's Boulter and other people are suggesting that actually we are being changed by technology even as we use that technology. And of course, these people are talking about technology in quite a wide sense. If we look at digital technology, and right from the beginning of digital technology, there's always been this association between the person and the machine, and the fact that they are related to each other. So in a wide sense, I'm giving you here the sort of cheerleaders of both views of what digital technology, how good for people it is. So, Marshall McLuhan, this ecstatic, it's going to set us free, it's going to make us all powerful, it's going to allow us to do anything we want, we're extended through technology. And Michel Foucault, just be a bit careful. Technology is a way of controlling you, it's a way of focusing your energies and your ambitions within a certain narrowly prescribed ambit, and that ambit actually suits the ruling class. So on the one hand, we have this utopian view of it. On the other hand, a very, very dystopian view. What both of these people have is that there is an effect on people through this. Yes, so I think, Donna Haraway did say she'd rather be a cyborg than a princess. And I suppose before we move on, I would want to say that, would we really be given that choice? McLuhan would say yes, Foucault would say, oh, no. Anyway, let's look at the use of technology as a mirror, because remember what I'm trying to do is I have these large data sets of generated through social media. And from them, I'm trying to say, find insights into the people that promoted them. So in other words, it's a one step removed from the actual people themselves. And I do want to think about how valid is that approach. So as I said, through archaeology, through looking at the development of tools, through looking at the development of population movements and that sort of thing, we can see the influence, albeit on a slow time scale, of the development of tools on the actual human frame itself on the body. And, you know, this relationship actually fits both of the two approaches I talked about before, you know. Whether you follow McLuhan or you follow Foucault, you know, the adaptation of technology to fit humans is necessary for either liberation or control. What we can say is that if we look at the technology, we can deduce aspects of the human system, as it were. And here, you know, I'm thinking about humans as both a sort of a wetware component, you know, the physical makeup of our bodies and the construction of our skeletons, but also as a thinking machine which has certain properties and certain ways of working, which of course are possibly less well understood than the physical aspects of our bodies, but still, nonetheless, we are fascinated by. Right from the beginning of thinking about digital media, in fact, before digital media even was digital media, there was an assumption that there was a relationship between human thought and media. And so here, if you look at the sort of key texts which really started off our thinking about media and data, you know, we have Vannevar Bush, who proposed the Memex. I'm sure all of you will have come across that, you know, 1945. And here it was very deliberately the use of technology in a sort of McLuhan-esque way to extend the power of human thought. And then, of course, the other big one, Alan Turing, in Computing Machinery, his paper in 1950. Again, it was about the similarities and the differences between human thought. Both of these sort of assume there's an underlying structural relationship between the operation of digital computation, or computation in Bush's case, and human thought. And so really, from the 1950s onwards, when you could look at all the debates about that sort of thing, is really being one about the opposing poles of, on the one hand, sort of prosthetic accommodation, in other words, you know, fitting technology around to make thoughts better, or increasingly close mimicry, of creating technology that increasingly closely becomes indistinguishable from the operation of a human intelligence. So human thought is quite complicated, as I've said already, but there are some key features that people widely agree on, you know, and in this project I really looked at two of these. On the one hand, a response to stimuli, and on the other, learning. In other words, being able to make connections between events that don't occur at the same time. You know, if I bang my hand with a hammer when I'm building my shed, you know, the next day when I go to actually fit a bit more, I'm going to think, I remember what happened yesterday. I don't actually have to bang my hand with the hammer again to actually make connections between the use of the hammer and the potential for danger to my fingers. So connection and response to stimuli. Those for me are the two essential features. And what I did then was I looked at how could I actually use the data pools provided by social media to simulate those two features of human thought. So looking at the stimulus one first, you know, the stimulus response, this is where something happens and people respond. And for that, I used an open source Twitter search API, and I've implemented it in a number of software systems now, where I can send a phrase or a word to Twitter, and I get back a number, I can decide how many, of recent tweets that have got that term in. So there's an example there of goodness, and you can see, you know, some of these are not so interesting, and some are quite interesting. But that's my stimulus response bit. So I can see that sort of thing happening in real time. So I should say all the searching I'm doing is real time. Twitter obviously has millions and millions of tweets. So this is a highly variable set. You know, if I search in 1 minute, I'll get one set of results. 10 minutes later, I'll probably get, there may be some overlap, but in general, it'll be a completely new set of results. And we'll see that working, I hope, my fingers are crossed here, in a few minutes. Connections is perhaps more interesting in some ways. And And for here, I'm using an unofficial Google API. Now, I'm sure you've all had the experience when you start typing into an address bar or often the form on a website, you type in a couple of words and then you see some suggested continuations. And Google has a continuation API where you can send it a term and it will send you back all the ways people have recently connected the term you're entering with other things. And this for me is a really, really sort of key thing. It means that actually you can get a summed real-time account of how people in the digital world are connecting different things, different lexical tokens. And for purposes of this project, I'm really saying there's an equivalence between, you know, concepts, thoughts, and words. I know that's not necessarily true for all the things, but for this purpose, it seems to work quite well. So having got one thing, I can find out what other things people have associated with it. Okay, so we're moving on now to the visualization. So the first thing I was interested in was trying to get some sense of understanding how these two things work together, how we actually, this great mass of thoughts surrounding us in the world, you know, we can't see, we're fascinated by it, we know it's going on, but we can't actually get any details. Through the combination of Twitter and Google APIs, I'm able to get some sense of what's going on in terms of that collective thought. And what I do is the Twitter search actually provides some starting points. And then I use Google Continuation API to actually extract that and extrude it into strands of connections. Now, it's not an entirely simple process. I'll show it in a minute, I hope. There are a number of things you need to think about. First of all, filtering. There's a lot of rubbish in Twitter. There's a lot of people, a lot of rubbish in Google. You know, a lot of people are asking for JPEGs or MP3s or that sort of thing. In other words, they're not about things, they're about people wanting access to resources. So I filter out those assets. Some thoughts generate a lot of, you know, connections, some very few. So again, there's some pruning algorithms I've incorporated in this. And the last thing is that, you know, this is designed for projection in public spaces. What I've done for now is I've inverted the colours, so, you know, things are dark because it's easy to see them on the screen. But of course, it will be the opposite if it was projected in a public space. And, you know, and I quite like to, I've shown this at the Google meetup, the Mozilla Festival meetup a couple of years ago in Ravensbourne. But, you know, what I'd quite like to do is project this on a library or some other thing where you've got a sense of, you've got static text you can go look at about thinking, and then you can see this, which is a sort of real-time display of how the public is thinking. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try a live demo. So we've got to get that off. Okay, I'm going to stop that share. Right, this is where it all hopefully goes right. So I'm going to start this off. Okay. Okay, I'm going to share screen, and here we go. Share. So at this point, the seed phrase has been generated, and now that the trees of this branching narratives are being spun out, as it were. One thing I like about this is some of it's very, very prosaic. And some of it's obviously got, you know, close to me here. Chingford is quite close to where I am located. But every now and again, you'll find some really sort of little poignant moments coming up with connections people have made that, you know, are tragic or they sort of represent the sort of impoverishment of people's lives and that sort of thing. So definitely you need filtering on this, you know, but you can see some quite interesting stuff coming up. translation is a big one. Whatever term you put in, translation always seems to come up. I should say the starting phrase for this is internet at the moment. I mean, I can set it, but it's just one that tends to generate some fairly interesting stuff. It's also quite common to get those little loops where you can see meaning is coming up several times and it spins round and goes back to itself. It'll do a new search in a minute. We'll see. We'll just let this go a little bit, but then I'll maybe move on. Okay, so what I like about that is that you know, it can throw up these interesting sets of connections, these trains which sort of proliferate and gradually move away from the starting point, but often or sometimes in sort of quite interesting and, as I say, sometimes quite poignant ways. I think the disadvantage of this is that actually it doesn't really do justice to the density and complexity of this sort of collective thought. You know, if you can imagine, really what you need to see is all of those different things sort of layered on top of each other. And I can imagine actually producing sort of prints of that where actually instead of the branches disappearing and being moved off screen or moved out of the way, I can imagine a sort of layering effect. So you get a much more dense sense of the context for each individual bit of thought within the overall collection of thoughts that are making up collective thought at that point. Yeah, so yes, now the second piece I'd like to show you is called The Wisdom of Crowds. And really what I was interested in here was I was thinking of the process of how collective thought comes about. In other words, it's not one person having a thought and then, but it's something that's being thought about by a lot of people. It's something where there is a range of views, sometimes a very wide range of views, but actually there is also some sense of one or more consensuses arriving, where people gradually shift their position. And that's not to say there can't be entrenched camps, of course there can, but actually there are recognised positions around which individual people's thoughts coalesce. And here I suppose I was thinking about, some of the things I've been missing during lockdown. So, going on demos, or, attending seminars or union meetings, things where an issue was being discussed from a range of views, and where some sort of consensus or a number of different but firmly held consensuses can actually emerge through that sense of debate. And so what I decided to do was I actually used the Twitter search algorithm, but instead of just taking the people's tweets, so I got my collection of tweets, I also started using some of the data that comes with a tweet about the users themselves. And so you'll see in the piece that I've actually got people's pictures put on the front of their characters. And what I've tried to do is I've tried to recast, Twitter, the Twitter discussions that go along as some sort of demo, or some sort of outdoor meeting, or street meeting, where actually people are taking up positions. And you'll see there are people with their banners, their placards, very important part of any demo. And you as the user can wander around, seeing what people think, seeing what people look like in most cases, and just getting a sense of what the range of opinion is and the range of debate is on these topics. And I suppose I put this as the process of collective thought emerging, rather than actually just saying it's there. So we will now try this. This is also, right, I'm going to share the screen. Okay, we're good to go. Let's try this. So here we are. Share. Right, now I just need to I need to get the control bar out of the way. It's rather unhelpfully. There we are. How's that? Okay. I'm hoping everybody can see that. Good. I'm hoping the internet stays up. So let's consult the oracle. Here we are. And here those people are being pulled in from the Twitter sphere. They're being resurrected in my oracle space, which is deliberately rather desert-like, rather arid and inhospitable. And as you can see, I've started off here. Oh, there's someone, you can see their head. I've started off, and the starting point, just preset, is wisdom. But in a minute, I'm going to invite some audience participation. Let's go and have a look and see what people think about wisdom. Okay. Here's a likely character. Okay, sort of vaguely cowboy hat. I think. Where's his one? Oh, okay. Oh, he's the fourth president of the United States person, I think. Let's go and have a look. Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to stop there because, of course, we may want to consult the oracle in something other than wisdom. And luckily, I have a little head-up display where we can choose a subject. Now, I'm going to look at the chat, or maybe someone would like to suggest something. Could I have a suggestion from someone? You'll have to unmute yourself, I think.
People are typing in the chat in.
Oh, are they? Okay. I'm just having trouble getting control of that. Can I see? Oh, I
can read them out if you like.
Okay.
Cheese, singularity, hands, truth, time travel.
Let's go with time travel. I'll try cheese later, I promise. Have I spelt that right? Tie travel, that's something different. We wait for the oracle.
You have an upvote for cheese.
Okay. Well, here is the crowd who are chatting about time travel. Let's go and see what they say. I think here we're getting searches for time. We want a duty-free life. Quite a lot of retweets. One of the problems with Twitter is that you can get duplicates, and I haven't taken them out. Okay, well, if in doubt, let's try cheese. I don't know what that means, jean jackets for dessert, but let's have a look at someone who tweets about cheese. You know, okay, that's quite cheesy. Oh, hang on, I need to walk a bit further. Okay. Okay, so that's the wisdom of crowds, and I do mean the title ironically, but I also do think there is something quite nice about wandering around and seeing what people are thinking and what are the constituents, what are the elements that go together to actually create this sort of sum thought. And of course, the Google tool, the auto completion tool, that is really summed. You know, you don't get you don't get individual utterances on that. There's a chat. What's that about? Is that something? What about concepts rather than commodities? You can put concepts in. You know, I think the starting one was meaning. I think I put in to start off with. Oh no, it was wisdom, wasn't it? So we can certainly try some concepts. Did someone want to suggest a concept, and we'll give it a go? Beauty, I like it. Okay. I've just got to share again, hang on. Okay, here we go, gazing up into the sky there. Let's get down to there. Right, let's get to beauty. Hang on. Some cryptic comments, I think it's fair to say, but I'm hoping there'll also be some more. Okay. Oh, that's very good. Beautiful from the inside. Yeah. Well, these are positive messages. This was a very good one. Okay. You can't argue with that. Well, probably could, but I don't even know what that is. But anyway. Okay. I don't understand that either, but I'm sure that's good as well. Right, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, let's share my screen again. Let's go back to here. Okay, so. So to start to sort of, sum up a bit and that sort of thing, how can you actually, think about augmented reality and think about the relationship between the virtual and the real world and the simulation or augmenting, can you actually use collective thought to make our experience of the real world more vivid? We're very used to being able to walk around the town with augmented reality when we could walk around the town and, see how a street looked at in the past, or maybe as we walk by a shop, find out what special offers they had in that shop. Those are all very immediate and very physically located. I'm interested in actually having an experience of the world where the sort of more general experience of the world is augmented in that sense, where we can actually find out how we as a connected species and, how we're feeling about a place or about a thing, that sort of thing. One of the things that worries me about digital art is that it's often very separated from lived physical experience, and particularly the changes in that lived physical experience. I've said in other papers that, the context for most digital art is actually just the means of the production. It's the computer system it actually works on, or the outdated browser you need to be able to see something that actually in web art, that sort of thing. Beyond that, there's very little contact with the physical. And I can see that, for me, I've always tried to make digital art that actually has a real world context. So I made a portrait machine, some of you may seen, which actually downloaded images from the news of that day and then paints a portrait of the person standing in front of a web camera in the images of the news that day. Similarly here, I'm now moving to sort of real-time big data sets, and it's a way of actually having VR or AR experiences which actually have some direct contact and some direct projection from the real world in virtual spaces. Now, I think one of the things we perhaps need to think about in terms of COVID is that, one of the big predictions is that suddenly VR and all those other things, as soon as we're actually able to come out from our rooms, no one's going to want to be back on computers. And actually there's going to be a renewed emphasis on the physical, on the real, directly experienced world. In that case, you know, I think it's important that we are able to maintain a sense of connection, you know, just because not being connected will become so alluring in that sense. I think there's also the thing that, you know, meaning in digital art. Again, it can, and some of you may have seen Lev Manovich's a recent sort of manifesto on the failures of digital art. You know, it can become a very sterile sort of world where actually digital art is increasingly bound up just with the making of digital art and with its own internal significance. I'm very interested in art that actually provides opportunities for making meaning. And in that sense, it seems to me that actually being able to relate an experience of a piece of digital art to the wider lived experience of people and societies, that hopefully is a way of actually supporting at least the capacity for making meaning, what Jesse Schell calls the lens of resonance in terms of looking at social digital artifacts. Yes, so that's the work really, you know, and as I say, it's work in progress. I'm looking forward and trying to develop new ways of using it, but I hope it's also going to provide a resource for people to actually create games and things where actually the real is able to intrude in the game, where they stop being an out of time or rather an out of social time experience, but they become something which has a context and therefore has the capacity to actually have meaning beyond the experience of the game or the art, which obviously is meaningful while you're actually engaged in it, but in some cases stops being that meaningful when you stop experiencing it. Thank you very much. I shall stop sharing.
Thanks very much, Ian.
Thank you.
People are welcome to turn their cameras and mics on if anybody has a question. Oh yeah, we should clap. Sorry, it's a bit weird doing it in my front room.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for reminding me.
We need to have applause clip to play after these talks.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question while I'm at it? Very interesting. Yeah, and thank you very much for this. The tree structures that develop in response to the tweets are very interesting, and it seems to me that they are kind of reflecting the momentary thought, but they're not. They don't have any kind of permanent kind of attribute. And I'm just wondering whether you feel that you might want to extend your research into some of these trees that might become thicker as they kind of fire more than once with a single concept, and that will be something that will be perhaps a little bit less momentary and not so permanent, but it would have some kind of more weighting in terms of what is the actual public thought of the moment.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea, and I have experimented quite a lot in terms of pruning and weighting factors in the tree generators. One thing that was, I suppose it probably was clear in retrospect if you looked at it, is an awful lot of continuations are very, very short. You know, they're just one more word added to it. And so what I have done is I prioritize slightly longer phrases. I actually get back 10 continuations for each item. And what I do is I prioritize the longer ones, so I throw away any that are short. And then I do a random selection if there are more than 4 left, or rather if each tree has a variable number of branches, depending on how many I get back. But the maximum is 4, because I found that if you had 5 or 6, it started to get too dense, and you'll have seen my sort of screen cleaning algorithm trying to move things out of the way. But when you have things branching back over quite a lot of generations, it becomes very difficult to keep track of where things should move best to avoid other terms. So Yeah, and I quite like the thickness idea. You know, there are some branches that are more sort of fruitful in terms of continuation than others. And that's one of the reasons why I prefer to prioritize longer phrases, because actually they tend to have more interesting continuations. So there's a lot of interesting stuff there. But I'd also like to go back and look at my sort of my dynamic placement algorithm, because you see things shifting out of the way. But at the moment, I think I'm just going back 2 or 3 generations. It'd be quite good to extend that back further.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Alessio
had a sound.
Sorry, Laura.
So now, just quickly, I see other people, of course, want to ask questions. My question is around, you know, in sort of natural language processing, and it's a bit more technical, part of speech tagging and all these kinds of technologies. We learned more than 10 years ago that you need a sort of a model underneath. So you can't just use keywords, because otherwise you're not getting any meaning, or as you're trying to do, which is very interesting, I really liked it, these collective thoughts, right? It links to the wisdom of the crowds, absolutely. Yeah. Which has been very well studied from a technical point of view. But if you think in terms of digital arts and how people can react to it, I think there's quite a lot of space for novelty and innovation there. And normally, many studies, you will use like an ontology to relate the terms. So not to get these huge graphs, but maybe people are talking about the same things by using completely different terms. But if you have an underlying model that can relate terms to each other, so to one is a generalization of another, one is actually more specific, you can prune better those kinds of big graphs. I really like what you're doing. So my question is more about, are you aware of these techniques? And I suppose so. And at the same time, so what is exactly, what do you want to achieve with this? Because I'm, less of an expert on the art side, and it would be very interesting for me to know what you want to achieve with that. I saw your visualization is very interesting. So from a perceptual point of view.
I think I'm most interested in producing a piece of art that actually makes people stop and actually see things, hopefully beautiful things that are coming out that they didn't expect to be there. I did talk very briefly about, my rough and admittedly very, very incomplete equivalence between sort of, concepts and the lexemes, the actual words themselves. This is very much operating on the words, because those are the way people have expressed those connections. I absolutely take your point that actually that's not the same as suggesting these are the meanings. I think that's a higher level mental organization, and I'm not at this point interrogating that, though I like your suggestion, and it would be very nice to get maybe some natural language machine learning going on to actually look at what was underneath all these things, and then you develop structures of visualizations of those sort of structures. That would be very interesting. Yeah. But at the moment, it's very much operating at a very surface level, where the actual means of expression is also as significant as what is being expressed. So in other words, the particular choice of word is itself meaningful. And to reduce, a set of equivalent words would actually be to lose information that was part of the information I wanted to visualize.
Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, nice thought. Yeah.
Grace has a question.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Grace.
Hi, my question is about, well, I had a question about where is the analysis in this? Because I was struck by your reactions. So you've gone to great lengths to find meaning, but when confronted with it, you would say, okay, interesting. Oh, you did say, oh, that's very good. Yeah. And you clearly weren't performing analysis for us today. No. So my question was going to be about where your analysis is, but in response to the question about what you plan to do with all of this, I had a clue, which is that you want to make a piece of art that allows people to see surprising things. So presumably that will be, if not analytical, then a carrier of some kind of meaning of yours. So then I heard you saying that you were at the moment caught in the medium, developing the means rather than ends. And my question then becomes about the extent to which you are in charge of what you're producing, how it looks. Because I was really struck, I'm getting there, sorry, I was really struck by a potential disparity that may be productive between the apparent, ostensible diversity of semantic units offered by Twitter and your initial statements, which were arguably rather neurotypical about empathy. And then your openly normative avatar scenario in the desert, in which every figure looks the same as, except for the impossible to see Twitter image on the face. So my question is about how you plan to unite form and content in terms of diversity and normativity.
Thanks, that's a really big question, a lot of interesting things. So to start off with the analysis, which I know you wasn't in your final question, but I think it's a very interesting point. I think I wouldn't want to provide an analysis for people. I'm not that didactic, or maybe not that confident. I think I want to provide an opportunity for people to be able to do their own analysis by presenting them in one place with a way of exploring the diversity of thought. And I suppose I'm using Unity so that I can provide an extended, possibly slightly laboured metaphor for that exploration. In other words, your character, you have to walk around and explore the space and see what people are saying. Now, there was, at first I thought, oh, I've got all these people who've made these tweets, you know, how can I actually bring those people into the arena with as much fidelity and you know, and be able to provide as much diversity and difference as possible. And it's quite difficult because actually you get some sorts of information through Twitter, but you don't get other sorts of information. So you don't find out about people's biographies, for example. You don't find out about people's genders. You might find out what colours they like. Some people have set their colour preferences, some haven't. And so I thought what I really need to do is, on the one hand, if I can't make everyone different, I need to make everyone the same. And just have one little point of difference to emphasize the one bit of, there are two reliable bits of information on Twitter you can find out about people. One is their name. And I don't know if you could see, but at the bottom in my debugging log, I do have access to the names. I haven't thought of a way I want, at one point I was thinking about giving them all t-shirts with their names on their chests. But that's technically quite demanding to wrap something around the torso. So I thought, okay, we're in lockdown, we're all wearing masks, so I'll just give everybody a flat mask, you know, and the people who know about 3D software will be laughing at me here. You know, that's quite easy to do. And then just paint it with this image I download from their Twitter identity. And by having everybody the same, apart from that face, hopefully that's emphasizing actually that the face is significant and the picture is significant. And that's where difference is expressed in those terms. It's very, very limited. I mean, I also changed the color hue completely at random of each character, so you know you're not looking at the same character. But you know, why does it look like that? It is definitely normative. It's actually a built-in Unity character that comes with the game system. And I thought, rather than download one and then have to make choices about it, you know, obviously all art reflects the tools of its production, the means of its production, you know, and Unity is very much one of the things I'm using here, and this is the Unity character. And actually one of the layers of meaning is that anybody who's involved in 3D work at all will look at this and say, oh, that's a Unity piece, because I've deliberately used the Unity stock character. He's called Ethan, by the way. He's a very upright American sort of astronaut thing, I think, with nutty sunglasses, but I removed his sunglasses, so I thought that was inappropriate. I think all the stuff you're talking about in terms of neurotypical is absolutely right and very interesting, really. You know, and I suppose in a way it just reinforces how as a society, how strange lack of empathy is, because, you know, there is this deep current of, you know, apparently right back to sort of prehistoric time, you know, where actually as an animal, we've always been very concerned with finding out what other people are thinking. And you know, that capacity is something that's actually driven our evolutionary success. Oh yes, Mike, good point about the sounds. Yes, the footsteps. Yeah, so I think some really interesting things to think about there, Grace. And I don't really have a definitive, here's the answer, but I can say I was thinking about those things, and I did make some choices about the use of presets and that sort of thing, which felt right in that sense. As I say, I don't want this to be a piece of art that prescribes a particular interpretation. I do want it to be surprising. I do want it to be funny, you know, but I do want people to think, oh, actually, you know, I'd like to engage with this further. I'd like to see what happens, you know, if I put jelly in or something silly or that sort of thing, or, you know, or something serious, and actually to really explore what people are thinking about.
Thank you.
You're welcome. No.
Thank you, Grace. Any other questions? Lubo.
Have you ever thought about applying a swarming algorithm on top of all this, and seeing what kind of phrases or sentences you might get?
No, I haven't. No, it's an interesting idea, Lubo. No, I haven't. No.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just something that, you know.
No, I think. Yeah, I must say that in terms of swarming and flocking and things, at the moment I've got each person walks in a sort of very complicated. Each person's got, I think, 10 different way stations around their placard, and they have a sort of patrol system where each one is patrolling around their placard. And I did think it would be nice if every now and again they all turned and looked at the person who was in the world. So you had all these people who were wandering around, and they suddenly all just went and looked at you. I haven't implemented that, but again, I've been thinking of those sort of mass behaviours.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking, there was time, maybe 10 years ago, when I was actually, in addition to teaching architecture, I was teaching computer scientists, and I was teaching virtual reality, basically.
Oh, yes.
X3D and VRML, and one of the master's projects was to apply swarming on different words, randomly generated words, and then a swarming algorithm. And you know, it produced some interesting results, but nothing kind of meaningful, and there wasn't really enough time to kind of stretch this into any serious analysis. But I thought, because this is now coming from the real world around, even though somebody said that there's no real world.
Yes.
That was David, yes.
There is David. Look at the physical constants.
But I thought, you know, considering that this is coming from this interactive world, then looking into how information might be grouped and how you would in that way generate some kind of collective thought by getting these concepts to.
Yeah, no, I like the swarming idea, I must say. I can imagine that, yeah, working well. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Any other questions? Grace, I was going to follow on from Grace's, but I'm going to let Grace speak first in case she reads my mind somehow. Who knows? Seems to be possible.
Well, my question was about It was about Twitter itself. So listening to your very interesting answer to my question, which shed a lot of light, I then went to Twitter and because you uttered the word jelly, I typed jelly into Twitter. And, you know, it is quite surprising what you get if you type jelly into Twitter right now. And I was thinking about how it's a lot more image rich because your desert shows text only. And so it's a truism, isn't it, in public relations that there's no point in doing a tweet unless you've got an image to put on it. So Twitter is a highly visual medium. But I'm also seeing, you know, some surprising statements about jelly, and it's in a two-dimensional environment. So I'm thinking about the difference between your simulation, which is getting a lot of praise in the chat today, and as a three-dimensional environment, and the problems that you've had morphing people's Twitter profile pictures into 3 dimensions. And then Twitter, which is yours is textual and 3-dimensional, and Twitter is 2-dimensional and pictorial. And so what you've done is you've made something different out of a Twitter search.
Well, that's very interesting because I look at Twitter on my phone, I have to say, where it's not that image rich. You know, images are rare in the bits I look at. And I'd never really thought of that, it being a visual medium. I can imagine I could reasonably easily add images to the placards. I didn't know that would be a problem. I just never thought about it being that important in the medium, but that's a really interesting point, Grace, and I will go back and examine. Yeah, it definitely is something different, and I definitely did have a sense of Twitter as a 2D screen-based experience, which I wanted to make a world where actually those things, you know, and I suppose I'm also thinking about all that stuff of people hiding behind tweets and sort of, you know, interacting through Twitter in ways they wouldn't in the real world. And part of me was thinking, well, let's put them back in the real world and let's see what it's like, you know, and let's have an experience where actually tweets and tweeters are embodied in a world and see what the experience that's like, you know. So yeah, that's a very interesting point there, the visual stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question before I jump in? I'm going to take that as a no.
Just a quick one, Ian. Is it a gallery piece, do you think, or is it online? Where does it sit?
It's a good question, Mike, and I'm not quite sure. I think a gallery piece, it would be frustrating because you couldn't steer it yourself. So maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a VR experience. I think that would work well, you know, because you get rid of the interface that way and you can just look around and wander at will in a more sort of intuitive way.
Yeah, I was going to say just quickly, there's a couple of really interesting examples of ways to display it that have been done by a combination of, I did some stuff I occasionally do some things for the V&A, and there's been, as a sound designer, and there's been some interesting ways of displaying this kind of material. Sorry, COVID. No, just kidding. At the V&A, and in particular in the Science Museum, there was a thing where you could feed back to the Queen some material that you'd like to share with her through a great big text machine that they had going. It may still be at the Science Museum, I'm not sure, but there's interesting ways of doing it. And I actually did think about this idea of doing it in terms of as a full dome piece. The idea that you would be able to actually morph. The Unity works really well doing that. And in addition, then you could potentially, I mean, these are all ideas you probably thought about, but vocalizing those works of text and then using something like Dolby Atmos to locate them in the space. And I know that's just bells and whistles of the idea, but it's this kind of idea that there's there's a kernel of interest there that could be spatialized that might make it give the project just an interesting way to bring it out.
I think that's a fantastic idea, Mike. I have to say, I've got this vision of being, you know, in a full dome with sort of in the middle of the crowd, and they're all shouting out their arguments and opinions. You know, that could be great, I think.
Yeah, it would be like a cacophony, but maybe you could.
Maybe if you walk around, you because you could have maybe a multi-speaker array system or something.
Yes, absolutely. I work with an artist called Karen Palmer who works a lot on this kind of stuff. We're working on a new thing around. We did one about the London riots, where you kind of walk around. We did one for the Cooper Hewitt in New York last year about violence, and this idea that you could choose what you choose to listen to and find your own way around it. And that kind of thing, it's just that thing of spatializing these ideas so that we understand them, ideas and how they could be placed. I have a lot of thought on that, but it's I'm not going anywhere with it right now. But yeah, it's interesting.
Great idea. Yeah, very nice idea. Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, Ian, I've got one. I was thinking, so right back to the start of your talk, where you provided some contextualization around mind reading, and this idea that mind reading, it's desirable in that there's a public fascination with it. And
I think people in public, I think there is a cultural fascination with it.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost a biological fascination with it.
Yes, but I think the interest lies from people reading other people's minds. It's interesting that it's something we're particularly interested in, what might be going on in other people's heads, but we don't want what's going on in our heads necessarily to be read or intruded upon or whatever, however you want to phrase it. So given that idea, to what extent do you think this work provides an insight into people's minds, a mind reading of some description, especially given how we conduct ourselves online tends to be quite performative, and obviously, we're not showing people the innermost workings of our minds necessarily. So that's the first part of my question. To what extent does it provide that kind of aspect of mind reading? And related to that then, what kind of ethical and philosophical questions arise from that, particularly when people are having their minds represented by this Ethan character who is, a representative somehow of all of us and yet none of us? I'm curious.
Yeah. I don't think I'm reading anyone's mind here. I'm deliberately not interested in individuals in the first piece I showed you. That there is, it's the fact that it's a sum of lots of individual thoughts as picked up in the continuation algorithm. That's what's important to me there. In terms of the Oracle piece, the wisdom of crowds, I did think about the ethics really, and I suppose what I think is these are all public tweets. In other words, I'm not able to search anything that people haven't already published. And more to the point, people have already published under their name. They're in their Twitter feed. And I think really, I suppose I feel there's some responsibility there for them. I'm not doing anything at all apart from saying, you said that, here it is, here's what you said, and here are you, inverted commas, you, obviously. And I think if they don't like that, then maybe they need to think about their tweeting.
But are you not doing something with it to the extent that when we enter into a discussion on Twitter, we can choose who we're engaging with, even if that's kind of like
true. That's a fair point. Yeah, I suppose
it's not criticism.
No, it is
very curious. I think that if we're bringing in kind of, take the jelly example, everything that everybody's writing about jelly at any given point, that doesn't necessarily mean that those people are conversing and that they are talking about the same angle or the same subject. So one of the things that's interesting in your visualization is that we can see the extent to which that topic spreads and how people are talking about it. But of course, they're not interacting with each other, but then we've got these characters representing people walking around as if we are in a space, at once kind of alone shouting into the void, but also suggesting that everything is kind of connected.
Yes, that there's some sort of community. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, actually. I hadn't thought about it, but I think you're right. It does make connections, and it's a sort of instant vertical slice across all those, conversation-themed or presented tweets, which obviously are presented in response to other ones and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's an interesting point. I still think it's valid because actually, that they are public and they are publicly searchable. I'm not doing anything nefarious at all there. Yeah, I think it's a fair point. What can I say? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something interesting in the way that people are kind of presenting an idea, but if we take that and we present it in a new way, we are then responsible for the way.
We are. No, obviously we're remediating it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I'm hoping is to enable the person, and I take Grace's point about analysis here, is enable someone to actually be able to see what's being said about something and come to some sort of personal understanding of what the range of opinion is, or what the outliers are, or what the sort of centres of coalescence are in terms of ideas there.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I did have a quick question.
One from David.
So one was I was actually really interested in your point right at the beginning of trying to read the collective conscious, what's going on in people's minds. The reason that it tweaked for me was because one of the big challenges of sort of any AI machine learning thing is understanding how the layers actually work. And what the computer sees, what the mind of the AI sees. So it's quite interesting seeing it through this lens, because you're looking at Google's autocomplete, which is almost its interpretation of human collective thought. So you're seeing it through two. So
well, I think it's just a summed average, David.
So that was quite interesting. I wanted to ask you about had you considered loops? So I noticed in one of the I think it was the final search you had right down the bottom, it was searching one phrase, getting another phrase, then it was getting the same phrase again and back. And I was like, that's quite interesting in itself, that it's creating this loop effect, which sort of took me towards node graphs. So thinking about viewing it as a node graph, hence node graphs.
Nice, no, very nice. Yep.
But yeah, I think it's quite interesting in that way. I'm more interested in the sort of neurology of it. And then I wanted to sort of, if you haven't seen it before, it might be worth having a look at the Hedonometer project that was done evaluating the emotive states of in stories. So taking big data sets from Project Gutenberg, passing them through a semantic analysis tool to evaluate whether it was a happy moment or a sad moment, and then plotting graphs of stories.
Interesting. No, I've not seen that. No.
I can send you a link, but it might be interesting to see because I think it's open source. It'd be interesting to see if what the outcomes of passing that data through that would,
Yeah, I agree. No, I can definitely mention that. Yeah, and adding that as a visualization, that could be quite interesting. Yeah.
Maybe they could plod around looking sad if they've said a sad tweet.
Have different behaviours depending on how.
There you go. Thank you, Ian. It was very interesting.
You're welcome. No, thank you, David. That sounds really interesting. Yeah.
Any more?
Yeah, I just had one thought, that you have these kind of auto-generated images, and I think I mentioned the thing, this kind of, they're kind of Gormley-esque, these kind of Gormley-esque statues.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah, I wonder about generating some sort of sonification as well, because some of these things have moods to them, and in Twitter, people go on Twitter because they want to affect the people who are reading them. People want to have emotional or some kind of response. Very much, Twitter is very much about poking people, I think, and very often in a negative way. And I wondered about sonifying some of that, in almost in a traditional score kind of way. So, in Unity, you could associate, for example, particular terminologies or particular sets of terminologies with tones, with sounds, with instruments and so forth, and build a score that is auto-generated through that, and associating things with chords, perhaps not even Western music, but thinking about different ways of doing it through different types of music, thinking about Japanese music, pentatonic scales, things like that, so that when you have a certain type of emotion, there will be a certain type of feel. I think Twitter has waves.
Yeah,
I
no,
think it's like this kind of like
right.
wave of mood, like this kind of wave of mood. And I wonder about, you know, by generating scores, sound, which is very much tied to emotion, whether or not we could get a greater sense of what's happening in this kind of bizarre world of just random people saying random things. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting idea. And I must say, I haven't really engaged with the sound possibilities of Unity at all yet. You know, people have noticed the stock footsteps, but
it's kind of frustrating.
Sound, which is interesting, I think. You know, the capacity to actually tie sound to locations so that as you move around, you can hear different sounds, that sort of thing. I have done an awful lot of generated sound work in the past, quite a long time ago now, but you know, it's certainly something that yes, I do need to sit down and have a go at in Unity, because I think it could be very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool possibilities. So many possibilities because the data is so open, right? So
yeah, sure. But also that, you know, you need the tools there. And Unity does have some really nice sound tools, I think.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And you can also tie it into pure data. You probably know all this, but you can tie it into things like pure data and into Max, obviously, and stuff like that to generate those kind of things.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting idea. Yeah.
Okay, if there is nothing else, no. Well, thank you, Ian. I'm sure everybody will join me in thanking you once more. I think the clapping's a bit weird. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that.
Yeah, let's save it for the health workers, you know. We don't do that.
Yes. But thank you very much for sharing your work with us, and thank you everybody for some great questions and a really good discussion. And I will see you next time. I don't have the date to hand, otherwise I would have been able to end that extremely smoothly, but I'm not going to. But Barbara's speaking for us next time on zero gravity fashion in November. I'll send the date and the link. Thank you very much, everybody. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, Laura.
See you all soon.
How nice that we are functioning again.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Lovely to see you all.